So today, Starfield officially added FSR 3 to the game, and I'm going to be testing it out with the ROG Ally and see if it helps it out at all. And for the settings, I'm playing at the low preset at 1080p with no upscaling. Alright, first thing to want to test out is New Atlantis, and we're playing at 15 watts of course to begin with. And yeah, so far at full res, we are sitting at 10 to 14 FPS. It's not surprising. This area is very intensive, and again we are playing at full res. Second area is this little ship, and I want to see how we do in a battle. So far in the mid to high 20s and the 30s. It's playable obviously at this point, but not very stable. Shoot this guy. FPS falls down into the low 20s, and even lower down to 13 and 12 FPS. So let's pause it, enable FSR 3, come back in, and see what we can do then. And now with FSR active, as well as frame gen at 15 watts. Let me show you guys in the settings real quick. There we go. We are sitting at 30 FPS so far, guys. That is a pretty good FPS jump. Now, to be honest, the game isn't the most stable with FSR active. It's crashed multiple times for me at this point, which isn't fantastic. And at times it does bug out. So yeah, keep that in mind. It isn't perfect, but it does work for the most part. And so far, again, we are sitting in the 30s and the mid 30s here, which is a massive FPS bump over what we had before. Wow, guys, indoors, we are sitting at 70 to 60 FPS. That is pretty crazy. That is pretty nuts. And the input lag feels fantastic, guys. It feels like 60 FPS pretty much. Alright, let's go down here and see how stable the game is. Okay, walking down here. Walk past the enemies, shoot the fire, and the FPS falls down into the 40s. So already at 1080p, the game is playable at 15 watts. That is actually insane. Now, to be honest, for the Ally, if you are playing portably, playing at 1080p is a bit overkill, to be honest. You can still have a good time playing the game at 900p or 720p, and the game looks very sharp and plays much better. Now, playing at 30 watts and at New Atlantis with no FSR, we are sitting in the mid to high 20s. So already, the game is becoming playable. It's not a stable 30 obviously, but it's definitely far more playable and enjoyable. And back in the Starship, the FPS is sitting again in the high 30s and almost the 50s here. And with the fire here, the FPS falls down into the 20s and around 17 FPS on the low end. Now lastly, at 30 watts with frame gen active, we are sitting at 60 FPS, guys. It's not a stable 60 sadly, but again, the 50s and the 60s on the controller feels identical pretty much. So this feels amazing. It's super responsive. Can't feel any stutters yet, but the main issue again is that it can crash at times. So not the most stable, but the frame rate is pretty good. And look at that, guys. 90 to 110 FPS indoors. That is pretty overkill for this system, but it can do it apparently. And with the fire, we have the FPS falling down to the 60s. A stable 60 at 1080p, that is quite good. And again, the game looks very sharp, looks quite good, and the input lag is pretty decent as well. It's not too bad at all. Playing at 900p and with no upscaling. Happy with that. Sadly, in New Atlantis though, the FPS is off to a bad start, sitting at 15 to 16 FPS on average. That is pretty awful. And yeah, back in here, our FPS is sitting in the high 30s and the mid 30s. It's not too bad, but as you guys know, with the fire, the FPS will fall down below 20. So there we go, at 900p, the game is not playable on the ROG Ally at 15 watts. With frame gen active, we are sitting in the low to mid 30s, but mainly the mid 30s, so around a 5 FPS increase from before. And yeah, back inside, obviously in the 60s and the 70s, and down here, that was a major stutter, and the FPS falls down into the 40s. So yeah, if you are playing portably, if you cap it to 30 FPS, this is definitely playable. Okay, back in New Atlantis, and I've gone ahead and enabled frame gen off the bat, but I did test it out without frame gen off camera, and it was sitting in the high 20s on average. And right here with frame gen active, so far guys, we're getting 70 FPS at New Atlantis. That is insane. It does fall down below 60 at times, but for the most part I am sitting in the mid 60s and the 70s on average. And indoors, so far in the 110s and the 120s, that is a pretty crazy FPS range for Starfield. And coming down here, shoot the fire, and the FPS falls down to the mid 70s. Alright guys, lastly, New Atlantis at 15 watts, 720p, and yeah, 40 FPS so far. The game doesn't look great, to be honest, at 720p. It's decent still, it's not too bad, but it's not as sharp looking, and the FSR effects are definitely far more obvious with this resolution. And back indoors, we are sitting at 80 to 90 FPS with FSR. That is pretty nuts for 720p and only 15 watts again. And of course with the fire, the FPS falls down into the high to mid 40s. So yeah, all around for portable play, playing at 720p is the move. So either a 40 FPS cap or a 50 FPS cap should do you good, and it should be a good time all around. Alright guys, 30 watts, FSR active, and yeah, at this point we are getting bottlenecked, but we are still getting 60 to 70 FPS on average. Alright guys, and for the last part of the video, we are back indoors, and as you guys can see, the FPS is sitting in the 130s and the 140s, and with the fire the FPS goes into the 70s and the 80s on average, and again without FSR, in this section we're sitting in the 30s with the fire and the 60s without it. Okay, that's about it. Thanks for watching guys, hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time for the next video. See you guys there.